Okay, dear friends, let's start our lunch. I'm happy you already started, but I would like to say a few words. Dear friends, thank you. Here in Munich, many people came to me and asked, how are things in Ukraine? And this is great, because it shows the support for our country and great interest. And I am so grateful that you came here. Ukraine is important for you. The United States have their own domestic issues, but the special representative for Ukraine is here, and members of the Congress is here, and governor and generals is here. It's great. The European Union also has some issues, but European politicians are here with us, and I am especially honored that President of Estonia, Kersti Kaljulaid, I am so honored that you are here today with us. Thank you. And Minister of Foreign Affairs of Denmark under Samuelsen, and the Slovak Republic, Miroslav Lajčák with us. And I am happy that Commissioner Hahn also today with us. Canada maybe has no issues, no domestic issues, but I'm especially happy that Chrystia Freeland is with us, great friend of Ukraine, and incredible Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada. Thank you, Chrystia. It's so important for Ukraine to feel the support of our friends. And our friends, our international friends, you are absolutely right to feel Ukrainians' importance. The challenges we face are your challenges. What will be allowed to happen to Ukraine can happen to you. So let's speak about Ukrainian security together. We have here also main Ukrainian presidential candidates, Yulia Tymoshenko, Anatoliy Grytsenko, and I hope that sooner or later, okay, not yet. Vitaly Klitschko, not yet candidate, but okay, thank you. Thank you. And Sergei Tarut also join us. Thank you. Presidential and parliamentary elections are coming in Ukraine, and we have to protect our elections from outside against meddling from foreign actors, and inside, because we have to guarantee free and fair elections without any kind of falsifications. And also important that in this participation will participate our Ukrainian Minister of Foreign Affairs. Dear friends, that's all from my side. I wish you very productive, inspirational conversations. I am sure that we have great moderator, Stephen Sackur from BBC. And in the end of my short remark, I want to say very sincere thank you very much for Munich Security Conference, for great partnership. This is a joint event with Munich Security Conference. And thank you very much for Ambassador Ischinger, who hopefully will join us. He will find time between Vice President of the United States and other politicians. He promised to join us. Okay, dear friends, let's start our working lunch. Stephen Sackur, floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Victor. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, bon appetit. The skill of eating and listening is one that you are going to require for the next hour or so. Do enjoy your lunch, but more than anything, do enjoy what promises to be some fascinating conversation, insight, and discussion. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Stephen Sackur. I present a show called HARDtalk on the BBC. I suppose if I'm known for anything, it's for challenging, rigorous, tough questions of men and women who wield power in this world of ours, and I hope I can bring some of those skills to bear in the course of the next hour or so. We have, and I should emphasize this, we have women and men of power who are going to talk to us today, and I think that is really rather important. I do an awful lot of chairing and panel discussion in international affairs. Sometimes we do not have as many powerful women as we would wish, but today we really do, and I am delighted about that. So, thanks for that. It is important. Now, it's going to be interactive, this. We have got a fantastic audience here. We have presidents, we have prime ministers, we have senior politicians for a diverse range of countries, as well, of course, as international media representatives, and we are going to be involving you in terms of questions for our contributors and panelists over the course of the hour. But first, we're going to hear some keynote opening remarks. In this year that is so very important for Ukraine, we are talking about the choices Ukraine faces. They, of course, are choices concerning presidential elections at the end of March, parliamentary elections in October. This is such an important year, a year of opportunity for Ukraine, but perhaps also a year where Ukraine can be vulnerable to forces who want to play a malign role in the country as well, and we will be talking about that. So, first up, please give a very warm welcome to a woman of power. She is the President of the Republic of Ukraine. Please welcome... She's not yet the President of Ukraine. In fact, she probably doesn't want to be the President of Ukraine because she has her own republic to look after. Please give a very warm welcome to the President of Estonia, President Kersti Kaljulaid. And Madam President, I promise not to give you another country again. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
So very formal standing up here, but welcome to Munich and to this lunch, all great friends from Ukraine and friends of Ukraine, and I'm extremely happy to speak here in front of you. I have no papers with me, I'm speaking by heart, because I'm speaking from my heart. I do care very much about what happens in Ukraine, and this is because we share a common past. We were occupied by the Soviet Union. Ukraine was also part of the Soviet Union. We came out in the beginning of 90s, and then there was a bifurcation point somewhere, unfortunately. But I think nothing is lost. Every country has hope, and every country can do better than it has been doing in the past. I tell you a little story which, for me, shows there is a lot of hope for Ukraine. I was in Ukraine, and I visited the line of conflict in Ukraine. And I tried to talk to those people who were coming to free part of Ukraine to get their pensions and social support. And these people did not talk to me. They didn't really know, of course, who I was, and we hid all the cameras, but they realized I'm a foreigner, and they were not talking to me. They were clearly afraid. They were trying to hide their faces, and they didn't want to talk to me. And it was all so sad. And then we moved away 20 kilometers into Ukraine to a village where some help workers were trying to help the internally displaced people, because here in Europe we do not want to face up to the fact that Ukraine has more than 1 million of internally displaced people because of the war here within Europe. But these people, I was there with the Ukrainian Vice Prime Minister. We sat there, and these people, you know what they did? They gave really, really hard time to their Vice Prime Minister. They were like, you are not doing this, you are not helping us with that, you are rubbish, you are not good, your government is not, listening to us, not doing anything. And I sat there and I got better and better feeling. And initially I didn't realize why it is so funny. Maybe because if you're a politician and somebody's having it out on another politician, it's always a good feeling. But then I realized it's not this. I was seeing free people of a free country having it out on their politician whom they thought was not doing what they were supposed to do. And of course, we are all quite worried, and I'm also worried that during this presidential campaign, every week when the numbers come out, how many Ukrainians think that their country is moving in the right direction. Despite the open debate and high number of candidates for the presidency, people are not regaining hope. They are stuck at the position. 60–70% of the people in Ukraine think their country is not going in the right direction. And I think we really should think of this before we think of anything else. All candidates have vowed Ukraine is going west. Does it then mean that Ukrainian people think it should not be going west? I don't think so. I think Ukrainian people think they should be going west and they should be moving quicker. How to move? Actually, it sounds pathetically simple. Nothing else but rule of law, fight with corruption, free media, equal treatment of all capital in the country, economically even playing field for everybody. Can do these things for any country. You have given your people freedom to express their frustration. This frustration needs to be listened to and changed. And frankly speaking, I don't have much more to add to my introductory remarks. Whoever will be responsible for the future of Ukraine cannot do anything for Ukraine before we can say that Ukraine is a country of rule of law. What does it mean to be a rule of law country? That you can invest in that country and be sure that your investment's protected. That nobody, neither from government nor from private sector, comes and takes it away from you. That if needed, you can sue the government or local government and have a reasonable chance to win. Independent justice system. And I know it is a lot to ask, and I understand in HARDtalk format here, I see enthusiasm waning around Europe. Should we stand up for Ukraine? Should we keep the sanctions? Should we keep the red lines? Yes, I know there are two red lines, protecting ourselves, our value space, and then helping Ukraine. But the lack of progress towards the rule of law and fight with corruption in Ukraine is an extremely good excuse for those who do not want to fight for Ukraine, are grabbing. I'm standing there, and I promise to stand there as long as it is necessary to tell there is war in Ukraine, and we need to help Ukraine to find solutions. On the other hand, I'm quite sure that only Ukraine and Russia finally mediated, yes, can broker a solution in the conflict. We will never recognize the occupation of Crimea. We demand that the occupied territories be returned to Ukraine. But I can see over the last 2 years, like I make these statements, and the uneasy feeling in the rooms is getting stronger and stronger. You're talking this, they are not doing. I know it's HARDtalk, but you're from HARDtalk. Sorry. That's all I need to say. Please make Ukraine into a country which respects liberal democratic values, has independent legal system and rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you very much indeed. And I think, Madam President, you laid out there very effectively the enormous challenges facing whoever wins the presidential election in Ukraine this spring. So without further ado, I'm going to invite you to listen to two of the presidential candidates. First, I'm going to introduce you to a woman whom you will all know very well because she has served as Ukraine's Prime Minister on 2 separate occasions. She has also challenged for the presidency on 2 separate occasions. Neither time before was she successful, but that has not deterred her from a third attempt to become the president of Ukraine. She told me last night that when she was a child, she was the captain of her local primary school football team. She was also the only female on the football team. I suggest that that perhaps is one reason we should take her candidacy this time around very seriously. So please give a very warm welcome to Yulia Tymoshenko. And a reminder for those of you who are not going to listen in Ukrainian, the translation headsets are available.
Good afternoon. I know that you need some time to set your devices, so I will take longer to greet you. I hope that everything's fine and we can start our discussion. I'm convinced that here there are no people who do not like Ukraine. Here there are people who really like Ukraine, both Ukrainians who I see here, and even if we are on different sides of the barricade, we still love Ukraine strongly, as well as our friends from outside Ukraine who help us go along this way. And for all those who love Ukraine, it's very important to know about some details. First, to name things honestly. If we do not set the diagnosis honestly, then we cannot claim that we have adequate recipes how to overcome the situation. Then I believe everyone would like to see the way how to come out of the situation in which Ukraine is. And I will start from saying I'm traveling around Ukraine now, and I recently was in Zaporizhzhia in Technical University, and I met approximately 800 students who are graduates, basically, graduating. And such meetings are always warm and open. And I asked them, I said, you know, you want that politicians be adequate, sincere, and I want you to be sincere and objective. So please give me an answer to one important question. Which one of you, 800 students, after you graduate the university, who will stay in Ukraine and who wants to go to live and work in different country? This was a very important question. I believe that out of 800 students, approximately 20, 30 will say that they want to go live and work outside Ukraine, but I was shocked. And I have video. 80% of students in the audience said that they want to live and work in other countries. And then I thought that children are not to be blamed that they have such a desire. I thought that that's us, our generation. We have not done our work. And we can talk about different economic indices. We can convince each other that 144 reforms in Ukraine are the best. But if we openly do not recognize that the only criteria of success or not success of politics in the previous period is the desire of Ukrainians to live or not to live in Ukraine, if we don't do that, then we will be mistaken in our strategies. For me, that was a test. We need to act immediately. And I always listen to what our Minister of Foreign Affairs says, Mr. Pavlo Klimkin. I respect him, even though we are on different sides of the barricade, but he at ICTV said something that is shocking. I want to quote, to be sincere. He said that we really have a catastrophic situation. Approximately 1 million Ukrainians leave every year. We believe that this trend will be preserved in the nearest future. And we understand that today the borders are transparent. It's like goods and services are moving via transparent borders between the countries, the same way people are moving back and forth, and they want to find the place where they would like to live with their family. And that is why we cannot shut our eyes to the fact that up to 1 million people leave Ukraine every year. How much time do we have? A year, 2 years, 5 years? How many people, creative people we have who will leave and who will stay? And I agree with the analysts in the global world who say that after the war, that the country occupant, the country aggressor, Russian Federation, wages against Ukraine, the second biggest threat is the fact that people are leaving Ukraine in masses. That's why we need to act. And despite having many competitors here, people who look differently at the concept of how to get out of the crisis, I believe that now, before the presidential and parliamentary elections, we need to create the coordination council, union, whatever we call it, but we need to think and find solutions which will allow us, starting from the first day after inauguration of the new president, whatever is the name of the new president, but we need together with this creative class create and implement new architectural project of Ukraine. Whatever we have today is not good, starting from the system of administration and this constitution of Ukraine, because all the corruption, lack of investment climate, the chaos in the country, these are consequences of non-effective and chaotic system of administration. And I would like us together to find the project of how should the new constitution look like, so that we in half a year, and we'll have the window of opportunities of half a year, from the inauguration of the new president till the parliamentary elections, we need to find the concept how to turn our country from chaos to order. We need a project which will be new, which will be approved before the elections and will be implemented immediately after the elections. I know that there is such a team in Ukraine. The worst that might happen, that after the presidential elections, nothing is done with rules that we live to. The system of justice will not change. The system of elections, the system of administration will not change. Every executive branch will not be supervised. That could mean that for another 5 years, we will be in a system of stagnation and degradation, and we have no time for that. So I call upon you, let's create one national team. Let's attract all friends of Ukraine who really think about Ukraine, and let's provide an architectural plan for Ukraine so that we change the system of administration rules of our life. And as to economic and financial situation in the country, I don't want us to deceive ourselves. We have figures, and we can see what we achieved in the last 4 years. I will be using the figures from accounting. Maybe that's boring, but if we take the nominal GDP in dollar equivalent without any synthetic adjustments in 4 years, we have the GDP which is 1.4% lower than in 2013 when the Yanukovych's autocracy was ruling. One other thing that we need to pay attention to, the wages and pensions fell by 1 and 3 times. And minimal pension today is $51 a month. $51 a month. And what the president of Estonia said, she said exactly the word what she heard from people: despair and frustration. And if these reforms do not lead to normal, quiet, successful life of Ukrainians, that means that they're just building the wrong road. At the same time, I would like to give you the figure of investments. If under corrupt Yanukovych in 2013, we had just in 1 year more than $4 billion investments, now it's a little less than 2. Then my question is, what's happening? That means that people don't come with investments to us because of one reason: because we have not created conditions for people from all over the world to come to work and bring economic success to our country. That is why our team, 70% of time spends drafting the way of how to take Ukraine out of this dead end, and maybe 30% of time we spend for election campaign, because we believe that our team will take responsibility after these elections, and we are looking with responsibility at how not to waste a single day. And that is why today we will meet Madam Christine Lagarde, so that today we can coordinate our work, and after presidential elections, organize our cooperation in the best way. And one more last thing. Our team absolutely is convinced that in a few years of correct policy, correct constitution, Ukraine will become strong. And one of the components of how to win the war with the country aggressor is to show strong, economically stable Ukraine, which is the country where people would like to live. And this will be unique weapon and force that will help us win all the battles with aggressor. And our team spends a lot of time organizing it, and we invite you all for cooperation. Thank you.
Can I invite you to take a couple of questions, Yulia, if you don't mind? My first question is this. Many of us who look at Ukrainian politics from outside see a country that is truly desperate for change. And the fact that one of the candidates in the race, who is in fact a comedian, who has no political experience at all, is currently, according to the latest polls, actually in the lead in the polls, suggests to me that Ukrainians look at you and they see a woman who has been in politics for a very long time, who is not a part of a wave of change, but is actually representing old politics and the status quo. How do you convince Ukrainians that you are offering something genuinely new and different?
I can tell you that we don't have a task to convince someone. The situation that we have in Ukraine now convinced Ukrainians to be wiser than any words can do that. People are in despair, they are frustrated, they are poor, and that is what convinces people to act wisely. And I believe that when every person will come to the polling station to elect a candidate to the presidency, I believe that people last minute will not be thinking about how to live merrily, but how to live in Ukraine. And I believe that the choice of Ukrainians will be absolutely serious and wise.
Who is straight with them, who tells the truth. When you promise Ukrainians that you can cut for example, their gas prices in half within 1 month of taking the presidency, and at the same time you tell them that you're going to have good relations with the international investment community and the IMF. Many Ukrainians think that is fantasy politics or economic populism.
I'm happy that you're interested in gas prices in Ukraine. That's great. It's good that you don't pay that. But I would like to say that our team is planning in half a year after presidential elections that we hope to win. We're planning to win parliamentary elections, and that is why I don't promise what I will not be able to do within this half a year. But at the same time, I will not allow anyone to take a monopoly non-market prices for gas, which are approved not by the market but by the government, which have 300% of profitability. When Ukrainians have an average salary of $300 a month and average pension at the level of $60 a month. So everything will be balanced. The gas sector will be profitable. Have no doubts about that. We will not make a single step that will harm the country. And we will start immediately negotiations and consultations with the IMF. I want to say it again that the cooperation with the IMF for Ukraine is extremely important and will continue it. So please believe that we will be together and we will have good negotiations with the IMF and the economic indicators that I mentioned, and they, I believe, are tragic. They will be the reason for the IMF to think of a new program for Ukraine with the new president and new government.
Very briefly, if you would, a final thought. It is clear that President Poroshenko has had a very difficult relationship with Moscow. The conflict continues. He is defiant. He is steadfast. Many in Ukraine believe that the Russians would like you to win the election because they believe you would be easier to deal with. What is your response to that thought?
Dear friends, I'm pleased that so many times you're asking the question that I answered many times, but I will answer it again. Even the mic fell. I can tell you that it's better to listen not to rumors and information provocations, but to look at specific facts. And I can tell what everyone knows in Ukraine. Today, the declarations of the president do not coincide with what he does. Today, the president, via the Security Service of Ukraine, delegated Viktor Pinchuk into the negotiation group on Minsk. Was there no better candidate for that? I wouldn't do that. I believe that in the nearest future, there will be evidence provided to Ukraine and the world, the documentary evidence of business cooperation between Poroshenko and Medvedchuk, and they earn big money, and all politicians know about that in Ukraine. Most of foreign experts who are outside of Ukraine know that, and I would like to request the whole team, Ukrainian team, and our friends, don't follow double standards. Call things what they are. If today the acting president conducts biggest business in Ukraine with Medvedchuk, that means with Putin, and that means that they cooperate. And I would like to remind you that there were no sanctions implemented against anyone who's close to the president, but there are sanctions against me and people who are with me. Our team will be defending Ukraine, no compromise, which would touch upon the interests of Ukraine. We will never do that including what is about the end of the war.
Very sorry to interrupt, but we must end it there. We get a real sense of the passion you're going to bring to the campaign trail over the next 6 weeks. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm thank you to Yulia Tymoshenko. Yulia, thank you very much.
I thank you, and I hope that in Ukraine, the pro-Russian forces will not rule in Ukraine in the future. Thank you.
Very much, Yulia. Ladies and gentlemen, in just a moment, we're going to hear from a second presidential candidate, Anatoliy Grytsenko. Before we hear from Anatoly, I'm delighted to say that we are joined by the beating heart of the Munich Security Conference, that is Wolfgang Ischinger, who has always cared a great deal about Ukraine and its place in Europe. So if I may invite Wolfgang to come and give us just a few words now. Wolfgang, the floor is yours. Great to see you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Is it working?
I hope so. Is Wolfgang's microphone?
I can speak from here. Does this work? Yes, this works. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me here. Thanks for being here. You are all part of what has been a success story of the Munich Security Conference. And I want to just make three very brief remarks. 2 minutes, if I may. First, after moderating a discussion with Sergei Lavrov, I really needed some food and drink. Thanks for offering it to me. First remark. Second remark, I am really quite proud that there has been a tradition here at the Munich Security Conference, which actually precedes me. It has only very little to do with me, where we have tried to offer the Munich Security Conference as a platform for the discussion of Ukrainian issues. Yulia Tymoshenko will remember that she came here a decade ago. Speaking personally, I'm very proud that ever since the events of 2014, we've been able to devote a significant part of our main agenda to the Ukrainian plight, if I can call it that. And I think this has been an important contribution to making the Western world, to making Europeans, and in particular Germans, aware of what was actually going on. Second remark. Third remark, I think that I had a kind of a thought when I invited, as the first person to raise a question with Chancellor Merkel this morning, when I invited a young member of the Ukrainian parliament to ask a question. Why? Because I learned, and I think this is still not sufficiently well understood in Western European societies. I understood when I lived for a bit in 2014 in Kiev that your country really has a surprisingly and admirably active and young and proactive civil society and young political elite. That is absolutely admirable. I wish we could say the same thing of all Western European countries. So this is actually a hugely important asset to Ukraine, and we should all make efforts together to play this up, not down. Well, and finally, let me just offer a kind of a political thought. I think if you guys, Ukrainian candidates, whether now inside the government or opposition candidates, if you can manage, and I think there is a good chance that you will, if you can manage to produce under the current political and, let me say, military circumstances, a decent election process, a free election process, where people from outside of Ukraine will say this was actually fair, and whoever is going to be elected was elected on the basis of democratic principles, free and fair elections. You will make to yourself the biggest possible gift in coming weeks and months. Good luck. I think you can make it. Thanks.
Wolfgang, thank you. Thank you very much. Which brings us rather neatly back to the presidential election campaign and to our second candidate. We've heard from Yulia, who, of course, fought in the elections of 2010 and 2014. So did Anatoliy Grytsenko, who is a former Minister of Defense in Ukraine. He leads his own political party in the Ukrainian parliament, and he, again, is making a third attempt to win the Ukrainian presidency. Anatoly, I'm going to give the floor to you right now. Welcome.
Thank you, Steve. I just want to return all of us back to where we are. It's Munich Security Conference. It's Yalta security strategy. I will switch into Ukrainian.
There will be no pre-election meeting. I will not be promoting. I will not be campaigning. I will not be criticizing the authorities. The elections are organized so that those who cannot leave and those who can will be able to ensure rule of law and also fight corruption and do it so that the partners support us. But we need to be sure that we have done everything we had to, and I mentioned it in Davos, so that the line of separation is like line of demarcation between two countries. Those who are in occupied areas see that it's better here, we are stronger here, but almost all those who are present, they will have elections, not just Ukraine, Europe Parliament will have elections, the US will have elections, but whoever is elected will have to jointly address the problems which are so urgent. We cannot but hear from the beginning of our conference, during this day, 1 soldier was killed and 2 were wounded in Europe. After Minsk, after the peaceful agreements, and the key word is peaceful, we have more people killed than before Minsk. Dozens of thousands of killed and wounded, both soldiers, women, children. Does the world pay sufficient attention to this problem? Not just because I am Ukrainian. Let's go up strategically and look at the planet where we are. Will those who are elected in Ukraine, in Europe, in America be able to be adequate to challenges that are ahead of us? I have a question mark here. I would like it to be an exclamation mark in Ukraine, in Europe, and in the US. Because the diagnosis is important, that's true. In the third millennium, one of 5 countries which took the responsibility for peace and security on the whole planet committed international crime, act of aggression. Do we all agree that that's a crime? Or do you have doubts? I have no doubts. If we agree that that's a crime, the crime should be punished, right? Or shall we be tolerant? Shall we continue business as usual? More than that, we'll be dancing at a wedding with the one who committed the crime, receive money, like ex-Chancellor Schröder. He's receiving money from Putin for the project which threatens European security, not just Ukrainian security. We need to balance these values because we know European community was united by values, and I believe now they are not so strong. They're not so strong in Ukraine. You're right, criticizing corruption, imitation of reforms. This is our part of tasks. But there's a different part of tasks. If Russia committed crime, it has to be punished. The crime is awful. Dozens, thousands of square kilometers of territory is occupied. Millions of people suffer, 1,600,000 refugees. The punishment should be adequate. I believe that all of you understand that only when Ukraine is in peace and sleeps quietly, then Europe will be in peace and sleep well. We cannot establish European security strategy without peace in Ukraine. I'm saying that not just because I'm Ukrainian, but because that's true. I say it because Ukraine is not a beggar for security, but Ukraine is a contributor to security. I'm proud of my country, of our soldiers, who from 1992 were the first ones of all the former republics of the Soviet Union were participating in peacekeeping operations. More than 50,000 of our soldiers participated in peacekeeping operations. More than 50 were killed, and now our soldiers are protecting peace in Kosovo, in Congo, in many other countries, unlike many NATO countries. Ukraine in 1994 was the first of the former Soviet republics which we joined the Partnership for Peace program and is cooperating with NATO actively and efficiently. Ukraine, not being the member of NATO, participated in all military operations of NATO, unlike members of NATO. Does it sound well? We deserved so that in this difficult situation, we have our partners next to us, and we are ready to contribute more. But when it's difficult, at least one problem is to be resolved jointly. You need to suppress Russia so that those who are imprisoned in Russia, so that they're released and come back home. Basically, when someone says that that's internal conflict, someone says that that's Ukrainian conflict, this is a military aggression by Russian Federation. And if in the third millennium, one of 5 countries which has to be responsible for peace is not punished, has not compensated the losses, have not deoccupied the territories, that means that all these structures that we create, that's all false. It doesn't work, and it's not just Ukraine, 2008 Georgia. No. Now, look at where Russia is. They are now in Salisbury, Britain, and ISIS, Iran will soon be near the borders. Let's tell the truth. The biggest threat for peace in the planet is Russian Federation. That's the biggest factor of destabilization in the world, Russia. If you are not afraid to recognize it, and that's the fact, then we will find a solution. And then this solution will not be just demonstrating the Declaration of Human Rights, will not be trying to convince. We need to understand that Russia understands only force, common efforts. Other things do not work. We need to understand it. Take Ukraine as an example. Ukraine, for dozens of years, was friends with Russia. Not just friend, was a strategic partner. Trading partner number 1. Deep cultural, family, religious contacts. And that just collapsed in 1 second, and we have blood, death, occupation. Will this example teach someone? Before that, the situation with Georgia was the same. Maybe someone will understand on our experiment, bloodshed experiment. That's not the way to put Russia into certain framework. I will remind you of the situation which was close to what is happening now, which for us, for Ukrainians, for all those who want peace, it was in the end of 70s, beginning of 80s. Right here, let's recollect the missiles. Do you remember in Benelux there were demonstrations when everyone was demanding to liquidate these missiles? Then you remember these games at the oil market with prices. There were several wars inspired by the Soviet Union and Afghanistan, Angola, Mozambique, Anatoly.
We're really going to run short of time in just a moment. I want the answer.
Just 1 minute,
Okay.
I will finish, and
Yeah.
you will ask your hard questions. Я хочу сказати, що
I would like to say that then the situation was when it seemed that the world is going into abyss, but two things rescued us: understanding of the problem, leadership, Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, Helmut Kohl, and joint efforts which were sustainable and which forced the Soviet Union to come down. And thanks to that, we lived quietly for 35 years. Let's fight for the next 35 years. Let's put Russia into the framework together, and Ukraine will put efforts.
I want to pick up on the very strong point you're making. Clearly, the war with Russia at the front and center of your feelings about what matters most in this presidential election campaign. Of course, one of the fundamental differences between Ukraine and Russia is that in Ukraine, elections are unpredictable, they're uncertain, and there is a genuine choice for the Ukrainian people, none of which can apply and be said about elections in Russia. But do you believe, as you watch the campaign unfold, and of course you are now on the campaign trail, do you believe that this is a time which leaves Ukraine vulnerable? That yes, it's a moment of opportunity, but also a moment of vulnerability for Ukraine that could be exploited and manipulated, not least from Moscow?
Дякую, Стів. Ви вже почали відповідати.
Steve, thank you, Steve. You started answering your question. You can also run for Ukrainian presidency. You have understanding. I would like, and I believe, and I will do all I can so that we come stronger from elections, so that no one has doubts in the process being transparent, so that the president and the team are legitimate, so that they are supported by the trust of the citizens, and this will be a convincing signal for credibility for our partners. I don't see any chance that the representative of Russia will become the president during these elections. I'm not afraid that this will change the priorities of Ukrainian foreign and domestic policy. They are correctly fixed in the constitution, NATO and the EU. But what we need to move towards NATO and the EU. But the corrupt presidents, the corrupt people are not accepted there.
And again, I know it's only opinion polls, but is it not interesting that Vladimir Zelensky, who does not build his campaign around foreign policy or policy toward Russia, is currently in the lead in the polls? And it seems he's in the lead because to many Ukrainians, particularly young Ukrainians, he represents genuine change. You, if I may say so without being rude, and Yulia and Petro Poroshenko are of a particular generation who have been in politics for a very long time, and many Ukrainians want something different. How do you address that?
Я бачив цьому.
I saw the protest of people who do not trust policy and politics and politicians. I see the challenge. because at this stage we were talking about security, where the president of Ukraine has to show the standard. We were saying how quickly we need to improve Ukraine. I don't want it to be like a comedian show. You are a great journalist, but I will not trust you, Steve, to be the head of the nuclear power plant, or great pilot. I will not trust him to be a surgeon who is making surgery for a child, and I will not allow the person who does not understand what is economy, what is military things. Let's not turn it into comedian show.
Well, we won't do that. And I do thank you, Anatoly, for your frank remarks. We need to leave it there because we have a panel discussion to do right now. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give Anatoly Grytsenko a very warm round of applause. Thank you, Anatoly. Now, I am very well aware, ladies and gentlemen, that you all have afternoon plans, but we do have 20 minutes or so left where we're going to have a quick fire panel discussion with a fabulous panel. So I'm going to introduce all my panelists onto the stage. Don't applaud them one by one, but give them a very warm round of applause as they all make their way up here. So President Kersti Kaljulaid from Estonia, Chrystia Freeland, the Canadian Foreign Minister, Pavlo Klimkin, Foreign Minister of Ukraine, and Kurt Volker, US Special Envoy to Ukraine. Could all four of you please join me right now? Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. We don't have an order, so just join me. Oh, we don't have enough chairs. That's rather more serious. Can we have one more chair, please? Ah, thank you. Right. Panelists, welcome all of you. Thank you for joining me. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then I'm going to raise some questions from the floor because we have some extremely insightful guests with us today, and I want to tap into their knowledge too. But let me begin, and I'm going to get all four of you to respond to a general opening thought. And it is about this season of elections in Ukraine. From your different perspectives, are you seeing Ukrainian politics addressing in a mature way the needs of the country, or are you worried that this election campaign is going to fail, as you said earlier, Madam President, fail to engage the Ukrainian people and leave the country stronger than before the campaign began? Let me begin. Actually, we'll go down the panel. So, Kurt, you start, and we'll just go right down the panel.
Thanks very much. To be quite blunt, Stephen, I see this as an election campaign where, as with most elections, the primary thing is people trying to figure out how to win. And so it's going to be a real fight just to get votes and to appeal to people. Honestly, we see some statements that are actually contrary to what Ukraine's best interests are because they may sound good in public.
What statements would qualify for that?
Well, for instance, you know, we've seen things about, well, we don't need to be told by the IMF what to do, or we can't afford gas price hikes or things like that. The reality is that Ukraine needs the IMF. It needs international support. The most important thing, Stephen, is that these be clean, free, and fair elections. And that will give credibility to whoever wins and a mandate to do what needs to be done after.
And from what you see right now, do they look as though they're going to be clean and free?
A lot needs to be done, put it that way.
Pavlo, I'm going to ask you for a perspective from inside Ukraine. Obviously, you sit in the current government, so your perspective is a rather particular one. But it's actually very interesting for you to pick up on what Kurt just said, so I invite you to do that.
It's great to be there. Look, I believe the next sequence of elections, and it's about presidential elections, parliamentary, and let's not forget about local elections, which would be as much important as other elections. I would not care at all about foreign policy and our orientation. Anybody who would try to deal with Russia on the Russian terms would be thrown out of the window right now, or maybe tomorrow. Hopefully not literally, but also literally. But in the sense of reshuffle of our politics, because it's not fair, it's not sincere, and we have to go forward. Corruption is not Putin hybrid's warfare; it's our hybrid failure. So the next elections should go in the direction of totally reshuffling Ukraine from the post-Soviet reality to the next reality, and this is why we have all to care about these elections.
Were you suggesting then that you think somehow foreign policy and policy toward Russia should be off limits during the campaign? I was just a little confused about what you were saying about the import of foreign policy in Ukrainian politics right now.
Ukraine is probably the only country in Europe where foreign policy is still important, because we are at war with Russia. But my point, anybody, literally anybody, who would deal with foreign policy in the future would be totally unable to deal with Russia on Russian terms. It's a no-go.
Okay. Madam President, I thought your opening remarks were fascinating, not least because you picked up on what you called the despair being felt by many ordinary Ukrainians at the extremely difficult economic situation and at the failure, as they see it, of their politicians to clean up the systemic corruption inside the country. Politics is a difficult business. Kurt has said, frankly, the next 6 weeks is all about winning. Do you believe this process is going to leave Ukraine stronger or more vulnerable?
6 weeks will not do it. As Kurt, I think these elections should be free, fair, competitive, and transparent about the financing sources of the campaign. But then I hope that the Ukrainian people will deliver in a continuous way so that at least the president and the newly elected parliament will be able to work together in unison. Because as we hear, there is quite a lot of consensus between all the candidates about the direction of the country. So the worst thing could be that there will be presidential election, then a few months will pass and the parliament will totally not be in harmony with the elected president, and they will not be able to move in any direction, and we are going to be at the same impasse.
Do you think there is a danger of, if I can use this phrase, Ukraine fatigue in Europe, and therefore a diminishing enthusiasm for engaging with Ukraine and helping Ukraine achieve its long-term goals of integration fully into the European family?
I couldn't be more clear than I was in my initial statement.
So that would be a yes, a resounding yes. And do you think Ukraine gets that?
People with whom I've spoken do get it, yes. And as we all know in politics, very often we all get it, nobody's able to deliver.
Chrystia, you bring the perspective. I mean, you're a long-time advocate of close relations with Ukraine, supporter of Ukraine. You sit in Canada, so it's not so much a question about European attitudes, but more North American and general NATO attitudes to what is happening in Ukraine. Do you again feel that there is a deep frustration right now with the lack of progress made in Ukraine, particularly on the corruption issue, and a sense that maybe this election is not going to change anything?
Yes to the first and no to the second. I think there is a deep frustration in Ukraine and among Ukraine's friends that reforms haven't been successful enough and haven't gone far enough. But you started off, Stephen, asking us about the election. And I want to agree with my colleagues on the panel that the most important thing, and certainly the most important thing for those of us who are not Ukrainians, that we can do is to help Ukraine ensure these elections are free and fair and without malign outside interference. And that is a big foreign policy priority for Canada. We're spending $25 million on supporting the Ukrainian elections. 50 Canadian election observers arrived this week in Ukraine, and they will be here until they will be in Ukraine until the election happens. More than 100 more Canadians will arrive for the elections themselves, and our support for the election effort in Ukraine includes helping Ukraine fight disinformation. And I would say only Ukrainians are going to choose who runs Ukraine, and that is the right thing. But what we as friends of Ukraine can do is help the Ukrainians have a free and fair election without outside interference. And by being there, we can help Ukrainians after that vote to assert to the world and to assert in the face of others who may wish to say the contrary, that Ukraine really is a democracy and that it was a free and fair election. So I urge people here to join Canada, join the OSCE in really, putting our shoulder to the wheel and helping the Ukrainians have a free and fair election.
With your commitment to that and the people you're putting in on the ground, do you have specific cause right now to feel that there is already systematic manipulation of the electoral process here in Ukraine happening?
Look, I think Ukraine is subject to malign foreign interference every single day. And, that interference is happening very directly. Part of Ukraine is currently annexed by Russia, and there is a war going on Ukraine's border. And that's just the start. So, of course, I know Ukrainians take very seriously malign outside interference, and the rest of us need to as well. And to Ukrainian friends, I say Canada is very committed to helping you have a free and fair election. And, Wolfgang Ischinger, I really liked his remarks and the point that he made that actually Ukraine has a remarkably vibrant, lively, and robust civil society. And that is fantastic. And we really have to support Ukrainians to have the democratic vote that they so evidently want.
Now, we do have a lot of distinguished guests in our audience today, and I do want to just draw a few comments from some of them, if I may, comments and or questions. So if I may, actually, I'll start with you, General Hodges. If you would just care to get a microphone, and we're going to bring one to you. Give us your thoughts. We're talking, of course, in this season of electoral choice in Ukraine, but you speak as a former commander of the US Army in NATO, and I just wonder how you are feeling about Ukraine, both in terms of politics and security right now.
Stephen, thank you. In 4 days, we'll observe the 5th anniversary of the illegal invasion of Ukraine and the seizure of Crimea. And I think that's been lost on most of the Western world. We just don't talk about it anymore. It's important to remember that. This is a real military conflict. So this is the first of 4 short points. This is a real military conflict. 3 months ago, 3 Ukrainian naval vessels were seized by Russian Federation forces. 24 Ukrainian sailors are sitting in a Russian jail somewhere. And if the West does not stick together, if we do not hold the Russian Federation accountable, then we have de facto acknowledged Russia's annexation of Crimea by allowing them to treat the waters there as territorial waters. The OSCE has got to be allowed to do its job. The brave men and women of the Ukrainian armed forces deserve a government that is transparent and delivers real capability for them. Only in Ukraine has somebody died with an EU flag in their hand. So that's what we're talking about. My second point, the alliance is working on an improved strategy for the greater Black Sea region. I think the security of Ukraine is not about U.S. or Canada alone. It's about the alliance addressing security challenges in the entire Black Sea region, which means incorporating and integrating with Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, and Georgia. And that means Ukraine has to have a real maritime strategy that ensures freedom of navigation, and that we somehow create an A2AD, anti-access area denial capability for the Western Black Sea to counter Russia's aggressive efforts. The third point, a Ukraine that is modernized, Ukrainian armed forces that are modernized, and a Ukraine that is strong and stable actually improves, and it's affiliated with the West, actually improves security for NATO. I think there is no chance that Russian forces would invade Estonia, Latvia, or Lithuania, or Poland if Ukraine, which covers its entire southern flank, is closely affiliated with the West. So it's to our advantage that Ukraine is strong and stable and affiliated with the West. And then finally, to my Ukrainian friends, I encourage you to note the members of the United States Congress that are in here today, the largest congressional delegation that's ever attended the Munich Security Conference. Our Congress is stepping forward and taking on more responsibility than I've seen in my life in terms of foreign relations, foreign affairs. I would encourage you to seek out those members and earn their confidence about this election that's coming up and your compliance with the rule of law and international order. Thanks.
Well, Ben, thank you. And actually, if I'm not wrong, I spy Senator Robert Casey, who is near you, Ben. And if we can get a microphone to you, Senator, I dare say there are many people in this room, if I'm honest, wondering about how to read the policies of the Trump administration when it comes to Russia and it comes to NATO and when it comes to Ukraine. Now, you're obviously a Democrat, but you sit in the U.S. Senate. You obviously watch very closely what the administration is doing, and you have to respond to it in your own way. What message do you bring to this audience, many of whom are great friends of Ukraine, if not Ukrainian themselves? Do you sense that the United States is as committed as it ever has been to the security of Ukraine?
Yes. Let me just say this, Stephen, thank you. Madam President, Mr. Ambassador, and so many distinguished guests. I'm here with Senator Roger Wicker, who's leading one of several delegations to this Munich Security Conference. Roger's a Republican. I'm a Democrat. But the efforts that have been undertaken so far to support the Ukrainian people are bipartisan, no matter what else you hear. Secondly, the efforts to counter Russian aggression are bipartisan and will endure no matter who's in the White House. Now, 10 years from now, for as long as they demonstrate that kind of aggression. Number three, we hope, and I think we've tried to help, the ambassador can outline even in greater detail, but we hope and we pray that the Ukrainian people will have elections that are, as the minister said, free, fair, and without any kind of interference. And we want to do everything we can to make that possible. But I want you to know, there are a few things that Roger Wicker and I vote together on. Roger does not want to be caught voting with me, okay? But on these issues, we are in the same place, and I hope we can hear from Roger as well.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Senator. And Senator Wicker, I don't know if you want to quickly respond. Well, you've got a big voice. I'm not sure you need one.
Senator Casey and I were just reelected to 6-year terms, so we really don't mind voting the same way for a few months at least. Listen, General Hodges said it well. He said it forcefully. He enunciated the position of Democrats and Republicans in the Congress, and I say that as the second-ranking member of the Armed Services Committee in the United States Senate. Ukraine needs to win. The people of Ukraine need to win, and they need to win for a better life for themselves. But also, Vladimir Putin needs to lose, and it's important that he lose this one because, Madam President, the Baltics are there, and who knows what's next. I didn't think Georgia would happen over 10 years ago. I didn't think Ukraine would happen. And it did. And, Madam Minister, you can rest assured Russia is trying to interfere in the Ukrainian election. You can rest assured they're trying to interfere in the machinery and the outcome of the vote counting, and they'll probably fail in that. But absolutely, they are going to be involved in disinformation and false news and stirring up dissent among the winning and losing parties so that after the election's over, the Ukrainian people can't pull together. So they're out there, and it's going to happen.
All right. We're coming close to the end, but there's just one more comment I want to get. I want to get another EU comment, and the Foreign Minister of Denmark, Anders Samuelsen, is with us. And Anders, we've heard this sort of very strong commitment to Ukraine security from the United States, from Kurt, from the senators. It just seems to me there is grave concern in Europe that Ukraine has failed to make the progress that was looked for in many of its governance issues, rule of law issues. And I just wonder, from an EU perspective, what your message is to all of the candidates in the Ukrainian election today.
Well, thank you very much. If it works, or I'll try to shout a little louder. Well, I visited Mariupol a few weeks ago with my Ukrainian colleague, and I saw the hardship caused by the Russian and the continued Russian aggression there. I think that it's very, very important that we do not forget that Russia still is and do illegally detaining 24 Ukrainian seamen. And therefore, I have called for new EU sanctions against Russia that if they do not release the sailors, we should enforce new sanctions. And I am quite optimistic. I'm quite optimistic that we will. I'm not sure yet, but I think that we are working in the right direction. The need for international support and solidarity with Ukraine is obvious, I think, and we have heard that from many sides today. Denmark has already taken substantial steps in that direction also, and we will continue to do that. We have also put Ukraine, in fact, at top of the agenda also tomorrow, on Monday at the EU Foreign Affairs Council. We will discuss EU support. We will underline that we support the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine. And we will confirm that the EU continues to support the ongoing reform process. And I will just end up by saying that it is so important that we will have free and fair elections in Ukraine and that the reform process should continue. I think that is so important if we should be able for us to see that, because if we see that, no matter who wins, then there will also be continued European support, and there should be for Ukraine. Thank you.
Foreign Minister, thank you. We're almost out of time. I just want to bring it back to our panel for a final thought from each of you. We do not know if we all come back here and have a Ukrainian lunch next year here in Munich. We don't know whether we'll be talking about a President Poroshenko or a President Tymoshenko or a Grytsenko or indeed another possibility. Who knows? There could be a President Zelensky. Who knows? And that would not be funny. It would be a serious proposition. So we've got to ask ourselves, is Ukraine strong enough that whoever is president, it can be in a stronger, better place by the end of this year than it is in today? It's really a question for all of you to express either optimism or pessimism about the direction of travel of the country. So we'll go this way this time. So Chrystia, you start.
Okay, I'll just say two quick things. The first is, Anders, thank you very much for your efforts on the Sea of Azov and on behalf of the Ukrainian sailors. Canada is working closely with the EU and with the US on that effort, and I think collectively we're going to succeed there. And then the last thing I wanted to say is I just wanted to make an announcement to everyone. Anders last year in Copenhagen hosted the second annual Ukraine Reform Conference. This is an effort by Friends of Ukraine to host an annual big international meeting to support economic reform, principally in Ukraine. And Canada is hosting this year. The meeting will be on the 5th of July in Toronto. And everyone should come. It's going to be after the presidential elections. The new president will be there and ahead of the parliamentary elections. And I think that will be a very good opportunity for all of us to give a real push with the new president for reforms in Ukraine.
And Madam President?
We are an important Munich crowd here. If we yell really loud, the windows open, Minister Lavrov will hear us. Release the prisoners. So I think we could do that. Release the prisoners, please. For the rest, I have to say, I will not try to predict the future, but I plead with all my colleagues, partners, and allies. Let's continue with our approach of not going back to the business as usual, because Crimea might never have happened if we had not been like a flashback to the business as usual after Georgian war. So please, whatever happens in the elections, we need to keep this in mind and keep supporting our friends in Ukraine.
All right, thank you, Madam President. Pavlo, the identity of the next president of Ukraine, of course, may have quite a lot of significance for your job prospects in your current employment, but nonetheless, try and leave that on one side and just address that broad point, whether you think Ukraine is going to emerge from this year of choices stronger or not.
No, it does not matter in what kind of capacity we're going to be there next year. Definitely not for myself. Actually, with all kind of my sincere respect to the candidates present there, it would have been more fun to organize debates between Zelensky and Poroshenko, but it's Victor's choice. Anyway, look, fundamentally, I believe we have a great record on free and fair elections, and we have to deliver again. I like to hear about more Canadian observers here. You have to substitute the Russian ones, so it's a good track. But personally, I'm absolutely convinced that in the future we will have something to fight for. And the next 5 years would be decisive in the sense of transforming Ukrainian reality. So in any kind of capacity, we have to work together, all good people in Ukraine, and I really mean it.
Thanks, Foreign Minister. And Kurt, the final word is yours.
All right, I'll join the chorus here. 1, release the prisoners now. 2, free and fair elections, make them happen. 3, once we're through the elections, Ukraine needs some big reforms, and particularly antitrust legislation to break up the way the political economy works now. I'm coming to Canada. Number 4, don't forget there is still a war going on, and people are suffering in eastern Ukraine. Soldiers are killed, civilians are killed. More people killed than any time since the wars in the Balkans. More people fleeing their homes than from any time since World War II, based on a war in Europe. We can't forget that. We, Canada, European states, NATO, Ukraine are all ready to solve the conflict. We need a partner in Russia. And then finally, the one thing that you can say about the last 5 years of conflict and Russia's war against Ukraine is that it has forged a strong Ukrainian identity that is pro-Western, that is pro-democracy, that is pro-reform, pro-EU, pro-NATO, and skeptical about being sucked back into Russia's orbit. And that Ukraine deserves our support.
Kurt, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you'd agree it's been an impassioned debate. It is so timely. This is a year of choice in Ukraine. I thank candidates Tymoshenko and Grytsenko for joining us earlier. I thank my fantastic panel for giving their insights into the politics and security of the situation today. I thank you all for being a fabulous audience, and I hope we can meet again in 1 year's time to talk about Ukraine 2020, a year post-choice. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Madam President, thank you.